a blue inflatable pool, a pair of chainsaws, a Tesla that made 2 trips to a remote patch of land in Santa Barbara County. Investigators say all 3 were connected to the same discovery, the remains of a 14-year-old girl found inside that car. The man accused is David Anthony Burke, the singer known professionally as D4vd. He faces charges of first-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation of human remains in connection with the death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. In August, a Los Angeles judge ruled that prosecutors had shown enough evidence to send the case to trial. That ruling came after a preliminary hearing where LAPD Detective Corey Farrell and Deputy Medical Examiner Dr. Grant Ho took the stand, and where the defense spent hours trying to expose the limits of what investigators actually know. Burke is presumed innocent unless proven guilty at trial. But the preliminary hearing gave the public its first real look at both sides of the case. And prosecutors have said openly that what they presented was only a portion of their evidence. Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hackman described it as a small but illustrative fraction of what investigators have gathered. On the sexual abuse charge, prosecutors laid out a documented pattern. Farrell testified about sexually explicit images allegedly found on Burke's phone, along with text messages referencing a pregnancy scare, emergency contraception, and sexual activity. According to Farrell's testimony, that pattern of communication ran from November 2023 through March 2025. Deputy DA Beth Silverman argued that even if Celeste had lied about her age, that would not excuse the conduct under California law. The mutilation charge rests on physical evidence collected from Burke's home and vehicle. Detectives testified that chainsaws, a mop system, cadaver bags, and an inflatable pool were ordered to the residence in the days after Celeste's death. A DNA expert testified that bloodstains in the garage matched Celeste. A criminalist described mats with linear cuts that tested positive for possible blood, cuts in the inflatable pool, and fragments of blue plastic recovered with Celeste's remains that were consistent with that same pool. Investigators also said Burke's Tesla, where the remains were ultimately found, was fitted with 11 air fresheners, and that testing found possible traces of blood inside the car. The murder charge is where the case gets harder to pin down. There is no surveillance footage of Celeste or Burke at the home that night. No witness has testified to seeing her enter the residence. The Uber driver who prosecutors say dropped her off could not confirm it. Nobody has testified to witnessing what happened during the roughly 20-minute window when prosecutors believe she was killed. Detective Farrell confirmed all of this under cross-examination. That gap becomes more significant with the medical examiner's own uncertainty. Dr. Ho testified that 2 penetrating wounds caused Celeste's death. But under cross-examination from defense attorney Marilyn Bernstein, he acknowledged he could not rule out that they occurred within seconds of each other. Asked directly, he agreed he could not determine whether Celeste had been holding the weapon that caused her wounds. No knife or other weapon has ever been recovered. Ho added that hesitation marks would typically be expected in cases of self-inflicted injury, and testified he could not establish the precise circumstances under which the wounds occurred. Prosecutors have already signaled how they intend to answer that gap. Rather than relying on an eyewitness, they plan to build a timeline from data. The text exchange arranging the pickup, the Uber's documented arrival, location information tied to Burke's phone, and the fact that no further activity came from Celeste's phone after that point. That silence, prosecutors argue, is itself evidence of what happened inside the house. Circumstantial cases built this way are not unusual, and they are not automatically weak, but they leave more room for competing interpretations than a case built on direct evidence. and that room is exactly what the defense worked to widen. This is where the defense's theory starts to take shape. The judge did not allow testimony at this stage about Celeste's reported mental health history, but that limitation may not hold at trial. What the defense could introduce were text messages from April 22 and 23, 2025. The period prosecutors say Celeste was killed. Those messages, read into the record, appear to show Celeste pressing to see Burke before a planned trip abroad, and Burke initially refusing before agreeing to let her come over. Bernstein also read messages in which Celeste allegedly threatened to expose Burke, telling him she would end his career and tell her father lies about him. In another message from August 2024, Celeste reportedly wrote to Burke that she had ended a pregnancy for him. Prosecutors argue those same messages support a motive that Burke, facing a debut album tied to a reported $19 million record deal releasing just days later, killed Celeste to protect his career. That theory underpins the special circumstances allegations, which include killing for financial gain and killing a witness, and which raise the possibility of the death penalty. The defense argues the opposite reading is just as available. Celeste initiated the meeting. She was, by the defense's account, the one making threats. Bernstein argued at the hearing that neither of the two forms of malice required for murder had been shown, that there was no statement of intent to harm Celeste, and no history of violence from Burke toward her. She also argued the financial gain circumstance does not apply, since anticipated future earnings are not established property interests under California law, and that the witness killing circumstance fails because nothing shows Celeste intended to go to police rather than simply damage Burke's reputation. Prosecutors are expected to push back hard on that framing at trial. Their likely argument, based on comments Hackman has made publicly, is one of sequence. If Celeste attacked Burke and he acted in self-defense, or if she took her own life in front of him, why would he respond by sending an alibi text within minutes, rather than calling emergency services? Detective Farrell testified that Burke sent roughly a dozen texts to Celeste's phone after her arrival, including messages asking where she was, and that his Tesla's location data showed the car leaving the residence around 11:30 p.m. that night, consistent with the first of two later trips north to Santa Barbara County. Farrell also testified that Burke's final text to Celeste's phone was sent April 26, one day after his album's release. Prosecutors are likely to argue that sequence points to concealment, not panic. The defense would need to explain why a person acting purely in self-defense or reacting to a suicide would move so quickly toward disposal rather than disclosure. Then there is the missing chainsaw. Prosecutors presented product photos of a Makita chainsaw they say was delivered to Burke's home by Postmates, but detectives confirmed it was never found there. The two chainsaws and an electric saw actually recovered from the garage tested negative for blood or DNA, and a criminalist testified that blades used in a dismemberment would likely retain trace evidence even after cleaning. Private investigator Steve Fisher, who has followed the case since it began, said he believes the missing chainsaw could be somewhere near Santa Barbara. Tied to a second trip investigators say the Tesla made there around May 8. He called the remote area where Celeste's ID was ultimately found difficult to have found by chance, saying the roads off the main road are not well traveled. There's also the question of the timeline itself. Dr. Ho testified he was confident Celeste had been dead for weeks, not months, but could not pinpoint April 23 as the exact date of death based on the autopsy alone. If the defense can raise real doubt that she died later than that date, it could unravel parts of the prosecution sequence. And there is the question of corroborating witnesses. Reported associates of Burke, including Neo Langston and Asia Collins, did not testify at the preliminary hearing, despite reported efforts to subpoena them and Burke's family. A TMZ report described a July 2025 livestream in which Burke allegedly apologized to friends for a smell in his bathroom, blaming it on a recent visit. Whether prosecutors will use that account or produce witnesses who can speak to what Burke told people close to him remains untested. No confession, no eyewitness, and no recovered weapon exist in the record made public so far. What prosecutors have instead is a chain of circumstantial evidence, forensic material tied to Celeste inside Burke's home and car, digital records suggesting a trip to Santa Barbara the same night, and a text pattern investigators say went silent the moment Celeste arrived at the property. A judge found that sufficient to proceed to trial. Burke is scheduled to be formally arraigned on August 31. Prosecutors have said they are not currently considering a plea deal, citing confidence in the strength of their case. Whether a chainsaw, a weapon, or a witness surfaces before trial is still an open question. What do you make of the gaps the defense has already found?